In poetry, meter is the basic rhythmic structure of a verse or lines in verse. Many traditional verse forms prescribe a specific verse meter, or a certain set of meters alternating in a particular order. The study and the actual use of meters and forms of versification are both known as prosody. Qualitative versus quantitative meter. The meter of most poetry of the Western world and elsewhere is based on patterns of syllables of particular types. The familiar type of meter in English language poetry is called qualitative meter, with stressed syllables coming at regular intervals. Many Romance languages use a scheme that is somewhat similar but where the position of only one particular stressed syllable needs to be fixed. The meter of the Old Germanic poetry of languages such as Old Norse and Old English was radically different, but was still based on stress patterns. Some classical languages, in contrast, used a different scheme known as quantitative meter, where patterns were based on syllable weight rather than stress. In the dactylic hexameters of classical Latin and classical Greek, for example, each of the 6 feet making up the line was either a dactyl or a spondy. A long syllable was literally one that took longer to pronounce than a short syllable. Specifically, a syllable consisting of a long vowel, a diphthong followed by 2 consonants. The stress pattern of the words made no difference to the meter. A number of other ancient languages also used quantitative meter, such as Sanskrit and Classical Arabic. Finally, non-stressed languages that have little or no differentiation of syllable length, such as French or Chinese, base the verses on the number of syllables only. The most common form in French is the Alexandrine, with 12 syllables a verse, and in Classical Chinese 5 characters, and thus 5 syllables. But since each Chinese character is pronounced using one syllable in a certain tone, Classical Chinese poetry also had more strictly defined rules, such as parallelism or antithesis between lines. Feet. In many Western classical poetic traditions, the meter of a verse can be described as a sequence of feet, each foot being a specific sequence of syllable types, such as relatively unstressed, stressed or long, short. Iambic pentameter, a common meter in English poetry, is based on a sequence of 5 iambic feet or iambs, each consisting of a relatively unstressed syllable followed by a relatively stressed one. Dum equals times, 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 so long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, times, 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 so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. This approach to analyzing and classifying meters originates from ancient Greek tragedians and poets such as Homer, Pindar, Hesiod, and Sappho. However, some meters have an overall rhythmic pattern to the line that cannot easily be described using feet. This occurs in Sanskrit poetry, see Vedic meter and Sanskrit meter. It also occurs in some Western meters, such as the hendecasyllable favor by Catullus, which can be described as XX, half-lines. In place of using feet, alliterative verse of Old Germanic languages such as Old English and Old Norse divided each line into 2 half-lines. Each half-line had to follow one of 5 patterns, each of which defined a sequence of stressed and unstressed syllables, typically with 2 stressed syllables per line. Unlike typical Western poetry, however, the number of unstressed syllables could vary somewhat. For example, the common pattern dum-da could allow between 1 and 5 unstressed syllables between the 2 stresses. The following is a famous example, taken from the Battle of Malden. In the quoted section, the stressed syllables have been underlined. The first 3 half-lines have the type A pattern, dum-da, while the last one has the type C pattern, dum-da, with parentheses indicating optional unstressed syllables that have been inserted. Note also the pervasive pattern of alliteration, where the first and or second stress alliterate with the third but not with the fourth. Caesary. Another component of a verse is meter of the Caesary, which are not pauses but compulsory word boundaries that occur after a particular syllabic position in every line of a poem if the poem is written in single meter. For example, trochaic octosyllable. If a poem is written in more than 1 meter, for example in trochaic 8 and 7 syllable lines, only 1 meter may have a caesura, as in the example below. In Latin and Greek poetry, a caesura is a break within a foot caused by the end of a word. For example, in the trochaic verses below, each octosyllable line has a caesura after the 4th syllable, while each 7-syllable line is without a caesura. Daily, daily, sing to Mary, sing my soul her praise is due, all her feasts her actions honor, with the heart's devotion true. Now in wondering contemplation, be her majesty confessed, call her mother, call her virgin, happy mother, virgin blessed. In English poetry, caesura is typical for trochaic octosyllable of church hymns, while iambic meters have no caesuras. Among exceptions is iambic septenor of A. B. Paterson's The Man from Ironbark with caesura after the 8th syllable, because this septenars are made of couplets of ballad stanza. It was the man from Ironbark who struck the Sydney town. He wandered Dover Street and Park, he wandered up and down. He loitered here, he loitered there, till he was like to drop, until at last in sheer despair, he sought a barber's shop. Shave my beard and whiskers off, I'll be a man of mark, I'll go under the Sydney toff, up home in Ironbark. Caesura is typical for syllabic meters of French and Polish poetry and for osmorak and desaturak of Serbo-Croatian folk song. Metric variations. Poems with a well-defined overall metric pattern often have a few lines that violate that pattern. A common variation is the inversion of a foot, which turns an iamb into a trochee. Another common variation is a headless verse, which lacks the first syllable of the first foot. Yet a third variation is catalexis, where the end of a line is shortened by a foot, or to a part thereof. An example of this is at the end of each verse in Keats' La Belle Dame sans mercy, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too. If the line has only 1 foot, it is called the manometer, 2 feet, dimeter, 3 is trimeter, 4 is tetrameter, 5 is pentameter, 6 is hexameter, 7 is heptameter, and 8 is octameter. For example, if the feet are iambs, and if there are 5 feet to a line, then it is called a iambic pentameter. If the feet are primarily dactyls and there are 6 to a line, then it is a dactylic hexameter.